Fun fact about me, I am a shill for Naughty Dog. Uncharted is my favorite game series of all time. I opened up my Last of Us Part 2 video by saying that the first game was my favorite of all time. My blind trust in Naughty Dog is the whole reason why I was disappointed by The Last of Us Part 2 in the first place. There are very few games that I replay more than once or twice. Even a game as good as Insomniac's Spider-Man, I have only played twice. But in the case of Uncharted 2, 3, and 4, I have replayed each of those games at minimum 8 times. And really in the case of 2, it's well over a dozen, and eventually that will be the case for 4. 2 just has a 7-year head start on 4. The only reason I really even own a PS4 is to play these games. That's not even an exaggeration. Also, side note, notice how I did not mention that I have played Uncharted 1 a lot, and that is because Uncharted 1 sucks ass. This game came out a year after the PS3 first came out, but it plays like a bad PS2 game. The story is wildly surface level, the environment is the same the entire game. It's just not something that holds up. The only redeeming thing about it is the characters and the surprising horror aspect with these Wendigo looking motherfuckers. But anyways, basically my point is I love Uncharted and I am far from the only one. This is one of the most popular franchises over the last 11 years, and there is actually one game in this series that is commonly considered to be one of the greatest games of all time. So which one is it? Is it the game that beautifully concluded the stories of characters that we have loved for nearly a decade, which has easily the most coherent story both with the characters and the element of history that exists with all of these stories? Or is it the one where there are pretty cool set pieces and the most generic villain ever with a pretty flimsy history element? Well, it is sadly the latter. Uncharted 2, don't get me wrong, is an amazing game. It certainly deserves its name being in the discussion for greatest games ever, but I don't think it's the best in the series. Uncharted 2 and 4 are masterpieces in my opinion, but when it comes to which game is better, if I didn't give 2 a bit of a pass because it came out 7 years before 4, and obviously there have been quite a bit of advancements in technology which has impacted every area of gaming, if I didn't give 2 that pass, this would not even be a contest to me. So I'm going to talk about Uncharted 4 and why I love it so much while comparing it to 2, and I do want to make a very blatant disclaimer. Uncharted 2 is my third favorite game of all time, so believe me when I say that I love the game. I am going to be saying a lot of negative things about a game that is literally in my top 3 of all time, while comparing it to my second favorite game of all time. So just know, I don't dislike Uncharted 2 whatsoever. I just think Uncharted 4 has everything great about 2 and then some. And I do want to say that none of this is because of the game being on a new console. As I said, I'm going to take that into consideration when ranking them. The things that make me like Uncharted 4 more than 2 are things that were achievable on the PS3, so as I did with The Last of Us Part 2, I'm going to summarize the game from start to finish, putting my takes in where I see fit. So at the very start of the game, we get Drake and another character that we do not know yet in a boat chase that ends in a crash. This is very similar to the beginning of Uncharted 2, where it starts with Drake hanging off the side of a cliff in a train car with a bullet wound in his side, which is a phenomenal opening. This is to get the player curious and asking questions. Mainly, what the hell did Nathan get himself into this time, and who the hell is this other guy in the boat? Then it cuts to black from the crash and transitions to Nate as a little kid. Now I do want to say this is the start of a section of the game that comes up a few times, and this is one of the flaws with Uncharted and Naughty Dog games in general. After you have played the game a few times, really only just once, these sections get kind of boring. It's similar to the section of Uncharted 3 where you play as a young Nate following around Victor Sullivan. Like, yes, his backstory is interesting, but once you know the backstory, these sections become a chore during a replay as you're just basically climbing and getting to know some characters, and that isn't much fun when you already know the characters. But this section introduces you to Sam, Nathan's brother. I'll say I was a bit apprehensive initially to this when I played this game for the first time, because introducing a core character to who Drake is in the 4th installment of a series feels weird, but they do explain it away well enough. Later on, when Nate is confronted by Elena, he introduces her to Sam like he's never told her about him, which tells you it's something that he just doesn't talk about. It's a bit flimsy, but it still works. This section really just serves to give some exposition about the relationship between these two. It ends with this cool transition to Nate as an adult, where I believe it's trying to show you that from childhood to now alongside Sam, Nate has been scrapping by being the adventurer you know and love. You're in a Panamanian jail, which is a great callback because this was before the events of the first 3 games, and Nate says in the first game,
Shouldn't we call the authorities or something?
Yeah, that'd be a great idea, but we don't exactly have a permit to be here.
What?
Yeah, so unless you want to end up in a Panamanian jail, we should probably handle this ourselves.
Well, what's worse?
You obviously haven't been in a Panamanian jail.
That game sucks, but it's a cool callback. We learn that Nathan is in prison on purpose with the help of a guard named Vargas. He helps Nate get to a tower where he finds a cross, but he hides that from Vargas. He finds his way back to Sam as well as our villain Rafe, who we will talk about at length eventually, but not right now. Nate shows them the cross, but they are confronted by the guy who Nate was fighting earlier as well as a bunch of his buddies. They get into a brawl which is broken up by Vargas, who finds out that Nate hid the cross. He brings them into the office where he says a bunch of threats like a third world thug, but the four of them seem to come to a deal. However, Rafe has a different idea, shivving Vargas, which is stupid. As Joseph Anderson, who is a big inspiration for this channel, pointed out, there is really no reason for Rafe to do this outside of being a fucking lunatic. Like, as we learn, Rafe is rich as hell, he has plenty of resources, he can just have Vargas killed after the fact. There's no reason to kill him now outside of getting Sam's fake out death. And as Joseph pointed out, there are ways to make this fake out death happen without this very stupid moment. But regardless, we get the fake out death, and then as Drake jumps into the water escaping from the prison, it transitions beautifully to Drake today, who is scuba diving. And this is a very good misdirect. You're thinking, okay, what adventure is he on now? But you eventually figure out that he is working salvage in the middle of a city, so no grand adventure here. And we see Nate in his mundane regular life with Elena, and because these two have such a great relationship, it doesn't feel as mundane as it could be, but the game basically spells it out for you that, yeah, Drake misses the adventure. Then we see Nate working late night at work, where Sam shows up after Nate thought he was dead, which I feel like the game could have dwelled on for a little bit longer. Like, after a minute, Nate seems pretty much over Sam being alive. Like, he's clearly in some shock, but I think it could have been exaggerated a little bit more. Sam tells Nate how he escaped from prison, but the game does this in a brilliant way. The reason why Sam's lie works for most people, including me in the first playthrough, is because you play through his prison escape. You don't hear Sam talk about it, that would be just whatever and leave you a little bit skeptical. You actually playing it makes it feel real and makes you believe Sam. If you actually pick apart the story, you see a lot of holes in it, but because you have no reason to be skeptical, because you physically saw it happen and physically played it, you're not skeptical. With us having no knowledge of Sam's character to this point, if he had just said, oh yeah, I shared a cell with Hector Alcazar and he broke me out to find Henry Avery's treasure or else he'd kill me, well, I and many other people would immediately be skeptical. But playing as a character that isn't Nate for the first time since that god-awful river section of Uncharted 1, good god that game sucks, it really makes you believe it, or at least it makes me believe it. Maybe I'm a fool for thinking the game wouldn't have me play through something that didn't actually happen, but that's how I felt. So after all of this, Sam tells Drake that the other cross they are looking for is up at an auction in Italy. Now, of course, after the fact, it's pretty damn convenient that this lined up so well, but I initially chalked that up to lazy writing on Naughty Dog's part. Playing through the prison break was so good at convincing me that Sam's story was true that I believed it was lazy writing before believing Sam was a liar that the auction was conveniently timed like this. But the Drake brothers meet up with the homie Victor Sullivan at the auction. They steal the cross, make their escape where you meet Nadine Ross, who kicks Drake's ass to an actually annoying degree. Like, I know Drake has been out of the game for a while now, but I have literally killed armies single-handedly with this guy, fought many bosses that were anything but many in Uncharted 3, so I don't care how badass this woman is, she shouldn't be able to destroy Nate like she does. And I doubt anyone would say it, but that's not because she's a woman. Prime Mike Tyson shouldn't be able to fuck up Nate like she does here, based on the amount of fights that Nate has won single-handedly. But they blast their way out of the area and find out that they have to head to a cathedral in Ireland, and here I must point out something Uncharted 2, 3, and 4 do very well. It gives a variety of environments. Once more, I didn't mention 1 because the entire goddamn game is in a jungle because Uncharted 1 sucks, and I think the variety in environment is no more clear than in this game. At the cathedral, you find more clues. Of course, this is a long section, but in terms of turning the tide of the story, there isn't much here clear at the moment. What does begin to get real interesting here is the history of what they're looking for. See, the story is the main reason why I think Uncharted 4 is better than 2, and I will elaborate on that more at the end, but I'm not just talking about the story of the characters. As Uncharted 4 goes along, you slowly put the pieces together to realize what this group of pirates did. The first real clue starts at the cathedral, where you realize this whole cave section is really an elaborate test to make sure who is worthy is who ends up in Libertalia, which is the society that Henry Avery created. This is more interesting than anything history-wise the series tries to do before this. Before this, the games kind of had a tendency to yada yada the history and the story of said history. This game does not do that at all. In fact, it takes it very seriously, but we'll talk about that more later. You find the next clue, which tells you to head to Madagascar, and then Nadine blows into this gigantic room conveniently right as they discover what the next step is, doing so after they said that Rafe has been exploring this area for 15 years. Like, what are the odds? This is something that happens a lot in this entire series, where it's like, dude, I was clearly a few steps ahead, but because you need there to be conflict, these guys magically appear so you have people to shoot. But this is a flaw that exists in all the games in general. By no means is it unique to 4. However, when they literally say that they've been looking for this specific room for 15 years, it really feels like more of a fuck you than it ever has. But now the boys are headed to Madagascar, where Drake gets a call from Elena asking for updates on the trip, and you can tell that she knows that he is lying about taking the Malaysia job.
Okay.
I love you.
Love you too.
Because of a clue from a coin that they got in the cathedral, you seek out the ruins near a volcano for clues, specifically looking for a tower. The catch being, there are a fuck ton of towers in this area, and this is really the only open area in the game, but as I said it in my Last of Us Part 2 video, it really isn't all that open. Like, instead of you having one clear path like it does most games, you instead have like 2 or 3, which I don't really care about. I feel like Naughty Dog does this to avoid the criticisms of their games that they always get, which is how linear they are, but it's still linear, just not as blatant. It really doesn't affect the gameplay in a positive way until a car chase later in the game, which I will admit is great, but it's not relevant here. And even then, that part isn't really open either. But you drive around to different sections with enemies, and these are fun. This would be a good place to highlight the gameplay of Uncharted 4. Now, I don't believe all of what's better about 4's gameplay could be replicated in 2 because of some technological disadvantages, but regardless, these sections allow you to approach them pretty much however you would like. If you want to go in guns blazing, you can, but it's also possible to take out every single person without getting detected, which as a fan of stealth in games, I love. Actually managing to kill every enemy in stealth is very satisfying. But the reason this works is a clear difference in AI capability as well as the type of design that really only works in very expansive open areas, which isn't nearly as easy to achieve on the PS3, so I don't hold this over 2 that much because I really think it's more a product of its time, but having the choice is fun. There is also a point in this game that you could say is the first real set piece, outside of the brief boat section in the intro, and this is where you could criticize the game, especially in comparison to Uncharted 2. Going in order, in Uncharted 2 you open up hanging off of the side of a cliff in a train car, you get in a one-on-one fight with an armored truck, get chased by a helicopter that literally takes down the building you are in, then you get in a fight with another helicopter while on a train, that train blows up by Nathan's hands, where you once again climb up the train car, then you fight a tank, you walk across a massive bridge that falls apart, so you must climb up of the side of the cliff, and then you escape Shambhala as the entire city collapses into itself. This all happens within a 6-hour game. Like, damn, Naughty Dog's writers were on crack. For a whole lot of people, the spectacle of these set pieces is what draws so many fans to Uncharted. For me, I'm more indifferent to them. So in 4, the lack of crazy set pieces doesn't bother me to nearly the degree that I'm sure it did for some fans of the series. This really, of course, comes down to personal preference. But this is one of the few set pieces in the game, and it's pretty damn cool. After fighting through these sections, you get to an area where you find the next clue, which points to the tower that they need to go to based on a symbol, but because there are so many towers, there are actually 2 with symbols close enough alike that they decide to split up, which has universally gone well throughout all of storytelling. Nate and Sully make it to the tower. There is a long climbing section with a puzzle that really isn't a puzzle, which I will say is easily the weakest aspect of this entire series. I don't like puzzles, and even if I did, these aren't good puzzles. But yeah, the whole damn clock tower ends up crashing to the ground, and then somehow Sully is just fine despite all of that crap falling down, and it seems like no one outside, there are literally hundreds of people just outside, seem to have heard what happened inside the tower. Or if they did, they just didn't care. Like, there is no way that y'all did not hear that. A fucking gigantic bell fell like 400 feet. They definitely heard that. But they find themselves in a room with another puzzle section where you are further hinted at to what happened with these pirates, as you see a bunch of portraits of them and do a puzzle that once again is really whatever. Nate ends up putting the pieces together to realize that the trail that he's on doesn't just lead to Captain Avery's missing ship with hundreds of millions of dollars in gold. It in fact also leads to a legendary pirate civilization called Libertalia, which has yet to be discovered because Uncharted was like, Nate already has 3 lost cities under his belt, what's 4? But then Nate calls Sam to tell him the news. It is instead Rafe who picks up the phone, and he gives Nate a proposition to butt out with no repercussions, but Nate does not, and Rafe ends by threatening him.
Okay. Rodeus Quota sent you for God and liberty.
These are nice pictures, Nate. Good composition.
You hacked our phones.
You stole my cross. Listen, Nate.
If you're half as smart as you think you are, you'll accept my offer.
What's it gonna be?
Listen, as nice as it's been to catch up with you, I really gotta take this call, so...
Well, Nate, one more thing. Nate!
What?
You do realize that your phones are equipped with GPS, right? I'll see you soon, buddy.
I guess here is a good section to say that I believe that Rafe is the best villain in any Uncharted game. Uncharted 1, what even is this guy's name? Uncharted 2, the thing with Lazarevich is he isn't a deep villain at all, which with how many great villains have been a big part of media in the past decade plus, I really have started to dislike villains that are just evil for evil's sake. Now don't get me wrong, I still believe Lazarevich is pretty good, but he's about as good as an evil for evil's sake villain can get. He is unpredictable, and he has a bit of a taste for theater.
You heard her. You'll get nothing from me.
Well, then it appears we are at a stalemate. Unless I add another pawn to the board. Bring her in!
Shit.
Get your hands off me.
Now, one we will use as a lesson, and the other we will use as incentive to cooperate. You choose.
This is bullshit, Nate.
Yeah, don't play into his game.
You want my help, you let them go.
This is not a negotiation!
But overall, not amazing. Uncharted 3's villain duo of Marlowe and Talbot are cool in terms of depth and history, but they don't really feel threatening. Lazarevich is intimidating but lacks depth. Marlowe and Talbot have more depth, but they aren't intimidating. With Rafe and Nadine, and especially Rafe, there's history there, there's depth there, and I would argue that there is some intimidation there. Don't get me wrong, I'm not shaking in my boots at these two, but there is something there. In this scene, Rafe has a calm, controlled, psycho vibe, which I think is great for villains. It's why I like Gus Fring from Breaking Bad so much. When a villain has that vibe, but then they snap, it can really be intimidating because it's like, this guy is usually fairly cool-headed, so he must be really pissed off. But also, Rafe is very grounded. He has a backstory with the Drake brothers because they used to work together. He also has a chip on his shoulder because he wants to prove himself as he stands in the shadows of his parents' riches. There's actually quite a bit of a parallel between Rafe and Nate. They are fairly similar, just with very different life circumstances. Rafe grew up with a silver spoon in his mouth. Nate ended up growing up on the streets because his mother killed herself and his father gave him up. Both are ambitious, but Nate proved himself and made himself a legend. Rafe didn't, and Rafe is jealous of that. This feels more realistic and more human than the walking embodiment of evil Lazarevich. Not to mention the element of him having a personal connection to Drake rather than them just conveniently going for the same treasure. And this is a general thing with this game. It feels quite a bit more grounded than 2. Now, I understand that some people prefer games not to be that grounded in reality, but I am not one of those people. This whole video is an opinion after all, and that specific opinion is not one that I'm dead set on because I love the MCU, and while they may have tried to be in Phase 1, I wouldn't call the Marvel Cinematic Universe grounded, but the lack of set pieces in this game is fine to me, and if anything, it's a positive because it makes the story feel more believable and grounded. Same with Rafe's character. He's much much more believable and much less cartoony than Lazarevich. And in general, this game is far less cartoony. But what follows is a long chase sequence where Drake and Sully are chased by a truck in the middle of the city, and this is one of the areas where I can actually praise the openness of this part. In this chase, there are a lot of turns and turns that don't really feel obvious, like this one right turn where you cut right, and then suddenly you are driving on top of rooftops. Nate and Sully separate, Nate catches up with Sam, and they take out a big truck that's following them. Here, both him and Sam have a thrill that they haven't had in quite a while, narrowly escaping death and outsmarting their enemies. A thrill that Nate has loved just as much as adventuring, and now everyone is having a good time after the escape. The good vibe meter is off of the charts. And they take these vibes into their hotel room, and boom.
How's the Malaysia job going, Nate? Seems like you're a hair off course. Was there ever a Malaysia job? Okay.
Come on, wait. Elena, wait!
I don't get you.
Look, I wanted to tell you.
You know what? Enough.
No, I wanted to, but how could I?
I don't know. Just say it.
I had to protect you.
That is bullshit, Nate. You just didn't have the nerve to face me again.
I knew you would react like this.
How would you react? You lied to me for weeks. If you were killed, I wouldn't have even known about it. And now you have a brother. Who are you?
Come on. I'm me. Come on, it's me. It's different this time.
Oh my God.
I have to save him. I don't even care about the treasure.
The look on your face when you walked into this room. If you're done lying to me, then you should stop lying to yourself. I got a plane to catch. You do what you have to do.
Damn, Elena, why you gotta kill the vibe? The perfect story does not exist, and the perfect story game or movie or TV show doesn't exist. But the perfect scenes do, and this is one of them. Not just from what's on screen, but the emotions that this puts the player through. This is one of those moments that shows that some storytelling is meant to be experienced through gaming, because you as the player feel just as dirty walking in to find Elena there, because you yourself just had a hell of a good time experiencing Nate reliving the glory days alongside him, and you walk in the room and, as I said, boom. This is fucking fantastic. Even though this story is completely out of my control, I still personally felt bad during this scene for the first time, like I did something. Like I was the guy who lied to his wife and was actually out adventuring and risking my life when I said I was on a fucking salvage job. Part of that is because of how this was presented, and part of it is because I have loved Elena in these games since I was 9 years old. She's a great character. For like 2 months, my Tinder bio said looking for the Elena to my Nathan Drake. Why? Because I'm fucking cringe. But this character I really like is disappointed in Nate, and in turn, I feel like she's disappointed in me. Also, I'd like to just point out that Sam stands in the corner like you do when you're at your friend's house and they're getting yelled at by their parents. After she leaves, Nate yells at Sully as he tries to tell him what he needs to hear, which feels bad because it's like watching someone yell at a nice grandpa who's only trying to help. It cuts to Nate and Sam on a boat looking for Libertalia. Sam tries to give Nate a beer to help with the vibes, but the vibes are just not there. They scour an abandoned island and find some clues that eventually shows them the final island that they need to go to, which they do, but they get attacked in the middle of a storm and the scene from the beginning of the game happens. Nate wakes up on the island and he is separated from Sam. And here's a section of the game that exists in 2, 3, and 4 that I call Nate is a sad boy. In Uncharted 2, he is a sad boy in the snow. In Uncharted 3, he is a sad boy in the desert. And in Uncharted 4, he is a sad boy stranded on a Mediterranean island. The sections of Naughty Dog games where you are without another person to talk to tend to be some of the more boring ones, but it is really good in this section because it's a great point for both Nate and the character to reflect. Nate talks to himself about how he fucked up everything, which he did, and you also get to some of the best stealth fighting sections of the game, and you finally meet up with Sam. They eventually, well, find Libertalia. There are some fun things in here, a few fights, a cool moment where Nate and Sam sit and do a little bit of reflection without actually saying much. They find where in Libertalia they need to go to get the cheetah, and it's in New Devon, which is the area in Libertalia where the head pirates and the captains live. But they also give some backstory to what happened here. Where they find this clue is supposed to be a bank of some kind, but it's barren, and the word thief is written across the portraits of all of the pirates that founded the place, which is a pretty good indication of what happened here, and it is later explained even further. They get up high in a tower to see where they need to go next, but they are interrupted by a rocket launcher taking down the whole damn thing. They narrowly escape being turned into Swiss cheese. They get into a fight with Nadine, who is now able to take both Nate, who is no longer rusty whatsoever, and Sam in a fight. Nate goes to take the finishing blow, but he misses and breaks through the whole floor, knocking everyone onto this ledge where Rafe and some guards confront Nate, and Sam is holding Nadine hostage. Sam threatens to kill her and nearly does, but Nate stops him, and then in a desperate situation, Nate tries to negotiate with Rafe, who rightfully laughs at him. But Nate explains that Sam needs a cut of the money to pay off Alcazar. He said he needs enough to get his freedom, which confuses Rafe because, well, Sam is perfectly free. Rafe explains that in reality, it was him who got Sam out of prison, and instead of Sam immediately tracking down his brother, the only family in the world that he has, Sam kept searching for Avery's treasure with Rafe until they had a falling out. Only then did he come to see Nate so he could get some help, making up this story to get him to come along after being out of the game for a while. Upon hearing this, Nate feels rightfully betrayed.
Oh, Sam. Jesus, no.
Listen, Avery's treasure was ours. It was always ours.
I left my life for you.
The time comes for Rafe to kill them. Nate says that Rafe needs them. Rafe says, no, I just need Sam. Goes to kill Nate, but Sam steps in the way and knocks Nate over the ledge, where he hits his head on a rock fast enough that it probably should have killed him. Nate blacks out, and it cuts to a young Sam and Nathan breaking into an old house looking for their mother's journals. This house is massive and has a crazy amount of artifacts. They find the journals, but are caught by a woman who lives in the house. She gives some exposition about their mother, who she knew, and as I'm thinking about it, I really don't care about that, like, at all. I feel like this whole section, if replaced by maybe these two with Nate at like 14 and Sam however many years older he is than Nate, and them just doing a small adventure and use that as a parallel to where they are now, I feel like that would be better. I don't really care about their mom, and if anything, I think them having a background and adventuring with their mother weakens Nate's character. So that happens, and we cut to Drake finishing this story to Elena, who tracked Nate down and pulled him out of the river with the help of Sullivan. A little convenient, but I'll let it slide. So finally, you get to play the game with Elena as your side character. Throughout this series, I have always felt that these two have had the best dynamic of any other pairing of characters, so I love seeing them together. But there is another deeper level to these two being together, because this conflict that they left on when Elena left the hotel in Madagascar is still there, and this element is explored over the rest of this game. The mission now went from finding the money in Libertalia to getting Sam and getting off of the island. Now that they know that Sam isn't in danger with Hector Alcazar, this basically became a rescue mission. So Nate and Elena take out some guards on the way. Not much is said about their conflict, but Drake mutters things to himself like this line.
Whoa. Hey, nice jump.
Not bad, right?
Way to go, Nate. Piss a girl like that off. Idiot.
Yeah, that's my criteria for the perfect woman as well. How well they jump. Look, you can be gorgeous and have a compatible personality, but if you can't jump from one cliffside to the other, I don't want to talk to you. Oh, you like the same music as me? Well, can you do a backflip? No, this date is over. As they move along, Nate tries to have this playful banter with Elena that they always did in games of the past. However, it's a little bit awkward and repressed. She still laughs along, but it's very clear she's not much in the mood for it. There is an unsolved conflict here. The two of them try to put it on the side and focus on the mission, but as they go along, they can't avoid the subject. And I have to say, this is done perfectly. I've never seen a romantic conflict, or any conflict really in general, between two characters handled so maturely and so real. Nate and Elena both have a mature and well-reasoned conversation. Nate is completely honest to her, and for the first time, completely honest with himself.
Come on.
I wasn't trying to protect you. It's just, I made a promise that I was done with this life.
We both did.
Yeah, but I broke it. I didn't tell you because I was afraid
Afraid of what?
of losing you. I guess I was protecting myself. You know?
I can't tell you how well this conflict was done. You just have to play it yourself. It felt so unbelievably real and unflinchingly honest, and it's just done perfectly. They seem to have things somewhat resolved, at least on the surface. There are still things to discuss, but in a moment of calm, one of my favorite sections of the entire series happens, and it's crazy how much I love it because it's so simple.
Next stop, New Devon.
Now would be a great time to point out the music in this game. This is one of the many things in this game that is just more mature than previous installments in the series. It's not like 2 and 3 don't have some calm moments of reflection or a variety of music, but it isn't done as well or as deliberately as this. This moment here is more memorable to me than Nate hanging off the side of a cliff on the train. And no, I'm not kidding. Nate and Elena's relationship has a very basic but very good score to it, which obviously was the one you just heard, but that wasn't the first time you hear it in this game, and you probably didn't notice when you played it the first time. But the second time around, you do. It's kind of like how in Avengers Endgame, the music at the start with Tony Stark and the end at his funeral is the same, and when you watch it the first time you don't really notice, but the second watch you're like, whoa. This music is a simple piano riff, and you hear it towards the start of the game when Nate initially lies to Elena.
Hey, hon, it's me. Yeah, listen, you're not gonna believe this. Jameson just walked in here with the permits.
And when they have a conflict in the hotel, we hear it pop up once more.
And now you have a brother. Who are you?
Come on. I'm me. Come on, it's me. It's different this time.
However, the theme in these scenes are muffled by other music and, of course, some intense dialogue. When it comes time for this scene, the theme is at the forefront, and it gives you a sense that everything is going to be okay. I don't know how to fully explain this, I just love it so much. So then what happens is this.
Should be on the other side of the bridge. Hang on tight.
Gotta love some heavy contrast. That's definitely not the worst thing to happen with a virtual bridge, but it's not great. But comparing 2 and 4, Uncharted 2 is basically just this bridge falling apart for 6 hours. There is a whole lot more of this than this in Uncharted 2, which is fine. My point is just that 4 has so much more depth than 2, and that's why I like it that much. But skipping forward, they find their way to New Devon on the trail looking for Sam, and as this goes along, they start piecing together what happened to this place. The mansions in this area of Libertalia are exclusive to the pirate captains. Basically, Henry Avery put together an all-star team of pirates, and they all just lived in the same cul-de-sac. In these mansions, they find letters that are invitations to a dinner, saying that they should settle their animosity. They make their way to Henry Avery's mansion, which of course is the biggest one, and they walk in on this.
Good Lord.
Looks like we found the party.
Here is yet another thing that I really just don't know how to describe. A lot of these things were hinted at, but this is where everything in the history element of this story comes crashing down. Almost every captain in Libertalia is sitting at this dinner table, and it's hauntingly gorgeous. Each pirate is labeled by a sigil, and this is where they all came to an end.
These are some of history's greatest pirates. And they all perished in an instant at this very table.
They put the pieces together, and basically what happened was Libertalia was one gigantic scam. Henry Avery and his right-hand man Thomas too set this place up for colonizers to come give them money, and then they also had a bunch of very rich pirates come live there as well. They pulled together a massive pile of wealth into one area to betray them and run off with it. Avery and the other pirates steal the money from the colonists because pirates gonna pirate. Said pirates have some falling out. Avery invites them to dinner to fix things, or at least that's what he says, and as Nate puts it,
Avery makes a grand toast. For God and liberty! Arg, ahoy, mateys, all that. And they all take a swig. Except these two. And just like that, all the treasure of Libertalia becomes the sole possession of two men.
now all of the treasure is in the hands of just 2 pirates. Let's compare this to Uncharted 2. Let me ask you, off of the top of your head, what is the history B-plot of 2? Because I honestly can't tell you off the top of my head, and I've played the game well over a dozen times. That's not a problem necessarily, but it's just pretty damn clear that Uncharted 4 way outshines 2 in that department. In the end, 2 and Avery killed each other in a boat full of money, and it highlights the themes of this game, which is greed and obsession. What's amazing about the history element of Uncharted 4 is how well it can be compared to the story of the characters. 2 and Avery burned something beautiful down for greed and obsession. Throughout this entire series, obsession has been a core element of Drake's character and a core element of the criticism of Drake.
Why this obsession?
You got your pride all tangled up in this thing.
Just isn't worth it, Nate. Let this one go.
Those same things are found with Henry Avery, but in this game, the focus in the end is less on Nathan and more on Sam. I mean, the guy lied to his brother and tore his life apart in the process in search of this treasure. Not only that, but after he got out of prison, he didn't even visit Nate for a while because he'd rather search for treasure. The parallels between Avery and Sam and Nate are there, and it's illustrated perfectly. And while Nate is figuring out everything that happened and is explaining it to himself and Elena, the camera cuts to Nate hunched over the table while Elena just stares at him. In this moment, even though there is dialogue, it's not that important. You can tell what Elena is thinking and realizing in this moment. In reality, the whole conflict of this game came from a foolish hope of normalcy and denial of who Nate and Elena are. They tried to have a normal life, and that wasn't the right move because not only does Drake miss the adventure, she does too. Calling back to Uncharted 3, Nate calls out Elena for liking adventure as much as him, if not more. This small snippet of this scene says so much where so little is being said, and it's beautiful. Again, these calm moments of reflection and real human moments don't exist in Uncharted 2. From here, the game comes to its natural conclusion for the most part. They finally make it to Sam. Not much is said between Drake and Sam. Sam tries to get them to still go after the treasure and focusing on the theme of obsession. This is a great way to show the growth of Nate's character. Now he is the one giving Sam the lesson that he needs to just let it go. They're about to finally get away, but something happens to separate Sam and the rest of the group. So they go after him. They get to this part where Drake gets to this ledge with the help of Sully and Elena, but because the cart that they use to get up there breaks, the two can't go up there with him, even though he literally has a grappling hook. He uses it right before and right after this scene, but it magically disappears off of his belt for a second to get this cheesy dialogue. Like if this happened without the lazy writing, Sully would just say, "Bruh, use your grappling hook." Actually, now that I'm saying that, I would really love to hear Victor Sullivan say the word bruh. I don't know why, but that would just make me very happy.
You want me to say, what? Bruh. I don't even know what bruh is.
Alright, well, that made my day. Back to the video. I honestly cannot believe that he actually did that. $35 well spent. Nathan goes after Sam, as it turns out he has made it to the boat with the treasure in it, but unfortunately Rafe is there as well. You have the final boss battle. Rafe doesn't hold back with his fighting, all while revealing the extent of his jealousy of Nathan's legend. Nate discovers 4 lost cities in the same years that Rafe was searching for one, with unlimited resources. I'd be jealous too. You beat him by crushing him to death with gold, which is metal as fuck and also a metaphor. Nate saves Sam and the core plot ends. Now for the epilogue. The main story concludes with Sully and Sam going into a partnership, which I think could lend potential for a spin-off game that I would definitely buy. It is very clear that Sam and Nathan, as well as Elena and Nathan, are going to be okay, despite the harm that Sam did to Nate and the harm that Nate did to Elena. And that's made even more clear when we get Nate back at his work. His boss comes in and tells him that he bought the business, to his confusion, until Elena tells him that she bought it with money from Avery's treasure. Sam slipped her some gold coins, which they will be using to become legal adventurers, while Elena relaunches her documentary show from the very first game. Elena realized that she also missed the adventure when she was in Libertalia, and she realized that the two of them were meant to do this. Sam says early into the game that Nate was meant for this life, and he was right about that. Nathan is way too good at discovering lost cities for that not to be what he's meant for, and Elena is meant for it too. It's why the two of them are such a good pair. The two have some fun dialogue as the camera pans away, very similar to the ending of Uncharted 2, and then it cuts to a game of Crash Bandicoot. I didn't mention it, but earlier in the game, in Nate and Elena's house, they played Crash Bandicoot while having some playful competitive banter. Apparently, Elena is very good at the game. Nothing like a gamer girl, am I right, fellas? But this is used very well as a transition to you playing from the perspective of Nate and Elena's daughter. You walk around a nice house in some pretty real estate on a beach, encounter a dog named Vicky, which is a callback to Nate saying that he wanted a dog that he'd name Victor. You wander over to a smaller house with some of Drake's artifacts, including a magazine cover with their daughter on it. And based on the captions on the side, it's implied that both Elena and Drake are now somewhat famous adventurers, and I gotta say, if that was the case, Drake would easily be canceled harder than any other celebrity ever. Sure, he technically saved the world 2 times over, but he's also killed thousands of people, many of which did nothing wrong, so yeah, the dude is canceled. But regardless, basically the end scene serves to give you an idea of what the rest of Drake and Elena's life looked like, giving them a happy send-off. So that was the conclusion of Uncharted 4. Now I want to break down every reason why I believe this game was better than Uncharted 2. Let's look at the Uncharted games of the past, how 4 compares, and where 4 improves upon the formula. The 5 basic elements of an Uncharted game is shooting and climbing, story, characters, and spectacle. Basically, graphics and set pieces. Starting with the core of the gameplay, which is the shooting and climbing, this game was a bit disappointing in this regard. Hopping over from next gen, the shooting in Uncharted has never been amazing, and while 4 shooting is the best of the series, it wasn't as big of an improvement as you would like to see jumping over to a whole other console. Same goes for the climbing to an extent. They did a good job at making the climbing path less obvious, as well as giving more than one option, so it doesn't feel like you're being forced down the same path every time, and the grappling hook and spike you get later in the game to dig into rock and get a hold are both great additions, but I feel like the potential of those two tools used together was only used to its fullest extent in the last climbing section of the game. When you are chasing after Sam, there is this section where there are very open caverns, so Drake has to swing across big areas, land on walls, and use the spike, but this is like a 3-minute section, and it's the only climbing section remotely this cool. A pretty notable improvement, but it was wasted potential, unfortunately. Now let's talk about the story. I said earlier the story is the main reason why I thought 4 was better than 2. The most basic reason why is if I'm summarizing the plot of each game, I have to write a whole lot more for 4. In Uncharted 2, Drake enters a partnership with some shady characters to try and find the legendary lost city of Shambhala. These two betray him, but it turns out Chloe is actually secretly on his side. She works as a double agent as you try to beat a tyrant and warlord on the way to the treasure. On this path, you encounter the girl from the previous game. There is a bit of a love triangle, but they continue the path to Shambhala. As it turns out, Lazarevich is there for sap that makes him nearly immortal. He gets to it, but Drake saves the day, and they escape as the city collapses. By the end, Nate and Elena realize they were meant to be together. In Uncharted 4, Drake has retired from treasure hunting and mass murdering, but his brother, who he previously thought was dead, comes back and pulls him back into the game because he says that he will be killed if he does not find Henry Avery's treasure within 3 months by the threat of Hector Alcazar. But Nate has to lie to his wife because he promised her that he was done with this adventuring life. They are trying to find the treasure of Henry Avery and quickly realize they are on the path not only to hundreds of millions, but the legendary pirate city called Libertalia. Along this path, they work against the villain of this game who they previously worked with. He is the mirror image of Nate without all of the success, charm, or know-how. When they make it to Libertalia, it is exposed to Nate that Sam was lying to him this whole time. He didn't need to risk his life for this treasure and throw away his life, but he did for his brother who betrayed him. Nate is saved by Elena. They have a strenuous relationship at the moment, but through time she forgives him and realizes that they were wrong to try and have a normal life. They save Sam, escape the island, and we see in the end that Nate and Elena have a happy life. All while this is going on, the history element of this story really picks up. As it turns out, Henry Avery founded Libertalia in an attempt to steal even more money, inviting pirates and colonists to live in his city just to steal all of their money. This story is a parallel between Sam and Nate, highlighting their obsession and greed. Both of those summaries was me trying to be as concise as possible without leaving out important details, and 4's story is far more complex. Let's talk about the characters now. In Uncharted 2 and 3, the story was thrown more into the background with a focus on character, so you would think that the character development and moments with characters would be better in 2, but they're not. The story of Uncharted 4 allows for the best conflict in the series between the main characters. In 2, the conflict is the falling out Nate and Elena had off screen in between 1 and 2, as well as Chloe not liking that Drake clearly still has feelings for Elena when they're currently in a relationship. That is the extent of the character conflict in that game. In 4, Nate is lying to Elena and Sam is lying to Nate, while both Nate and Elena are lying to themselves, while Nate deals with the guilt of having left Sam for dead. These conflicts between the characters are serviced by the story, so they are intertwined perfectly. In 2, if you remove those character conflicts, I don't know how much the game would really change. In 4, those conflicts are the game. I actually think the clear difference between 2 and 4 can be attributed to the game that came in between them. No, not Uncharted 3, though there was a bit of a tone shift with that game. Naughty Dog learned a lot of lessons that made 4 a superior game from The Last of Us. This game struck a drastically different tone from Uncharted, and for what they were going for in The Last of Us versus the Uncharted series, they had no choice but to have a great story because the gameplay and tone of The Last of Us doesn't really work without a great story. When you have that, you get a mediocre game. For evidence of that, look no further than The Last of Us Part 2. So as a result, I think Naughty Dog finally set out to write a very good, much better story, which is what they did with The Last of Us. So when it came time to make their next game, the game to close out their money-making machine of a franchise, that improved storytelling was implemented into Uncharted 4. Another quick story thing that points to some more maturity and a different tone, there is no supernatural element in the 4th game. The one thing I can easily point to in Uncharted 2 that I just straight up don't like is these purple motherfuckers. First of all, they dress up in animal suits to be like scarecrows, even though they're already scary monsters. But more importantly, I just don't like there being a supernatural element to these games. I feel like the games can stand alone, and while yeah, it's not realistic for a lot of things that happen in these games to happen, it just feels immature and kind of a cop-out to have basically these purple hairless Bigfoots running around. Though the third act of Uncharted 3 was kind of trash, which makes what could have been a great game just good, what I did like was how the supernatural element was a misdirect and in reality, Drake was just tripping balls. Now, one thing I'd like to address with the quality of this story that I'm sure those who prefer 2 will bring up is that 4 is a lot longer of a game than 2, so there was more room for story, and 2 couldn't have been as long due to the limitations limitations of it being a PS3 game and not a PS4 game. Uncharted 2 has a runtime of around 10 hours, Uncharted 4 has around a 17-hour runtime. All of this is true. However, the length of a story and the quality of a story are not directly correlated, and while there are countless examples of that, like literally hundreds of thousands, looking at just Naughty Dog games alone, the story of The Last of Us is better than the story of Uncharted 4, despite it being the same exact length as Uncharted 2. Naughty Dog themselves proved that even with less time you can produce a better story, so that's not an excuse. Limited runtime does not equal a worse story. The Last of Us 2 has a worse story than The Last of Us 1. If anything, the extra runtime hurts that game. The last thing to talk about is spectacle. I think this one is basically tied, but I can see how people would definitely disagree with that. Uncharted 2 undoubtedly has more set pieces in it, or at least it's more dense with them. But 4 to me is a better looking game relative to the console generation. This could be poor memory, but in comparison to other games on the PS3, Uncharted 2 and 3 were among the best, but I think Uncharted 4 as well as the underrated Uncharted Lost Legacy spin-off are some of the best looking games on the console. 2 wins in set pieces, 4 wins in graphics. That could be recency bias on my part, but I don't remember being blown away by the graphics of 2 like I was for 4. And finally, let's talk about the characters, both established characters and new ones. The 3 main reoccurring characters in this game are Nate, Elena, and Sully, and I want to talk about their character arcs in 2 versus 4. Now, in the case of Sully, while he is a motherfucking gangster, he is a static character, so he doesn't really have a character development in any of the games, he's just there for the ride. In the case of Elena, in Uncharted 2, her main arc is really just falling in love with Nate again, which isn't much. In 4, she deals with the conflict of Nate lying to her, and when she comes back, she realizes that she was wrong to try and live a normal life away from adventure with Drake, and she tries to correct that. They felt this need to go down a traditional path, but doing so, they ignored who they were as people. Throughout this game, Elena realizes this. Not just the scene with the pirate dinner, by the way. There are times I didn't even mention where Elena is clearly in her element, and her and Nate are working together perfectly, both clearly built for this life. And if we are comparing the plot relevance of Elena in both games, it isn't even close. In Uncharted 2, as much as I like her, other than serving as a translator in the village for Tenzin, she isn't really that important. In 4, she is essentially half of the story of our characters, both with her own arc and Nathan's lie, which is something he has to keep up with, get confronted with by Elena, and then apologize for. I'm going to make a weird comparison here between 2 love interests, but conveniently with the second installment in a 4-game franchise, comparing the second and 4th installment of Shrek. In Shrek 2, as good of a character as Fiona is, she isn't a big part of that movie. In Shrek 4, she is an integral part of that movie. Take her out, and that movie does not work at all. Outside of her decision in the end with kissing Shrek, she doesn't matter at all in Shrek 2. The same thing applies to Elena in 2 versus 4. I know that's a weird comparison, but it's true. Elena is at her best in Uncharted 4. Also, Shrek 4 is very good, does not deserve the shit that it gets, and Schaefer-Rillis Productions made a great video on it. So Elena is way better in 4 than she is in 2. Now let's talk about the main man himself, Nathan Drake. Nate is one of my favorite characters of all time. He certainly isn't the deepest character ever, but he's a fun, generally lighthearted, very funny, passionate, and smart guy who very clearly loves what he does, which is admirable. His sense of humor reminds me of that of Deadpool in many ways, and because of that, he's just a fun protagonist. But with that fun attitude, he isn't easy to take seriously, or at least he wasn't until Uncharted 4. In Uncharted 2, Drake doesn't really learn a whole lot. He does some noble things, and he has his character tested, but I don't know if there's any real development to his character. If anything, Uncharted 2 Drake as well as Uncharted 3 Drake serve as the foundation of the development of Drake in the 4th installment of the game. In 4, Nate essentially relapses and has to come to terms with his addiction to adventuring as well as what he did to Elena. And in his path doing so, he ends up giving Sam a lesson that he had yet to learn in 2 and 3. And speaking of Sam, as I said at the start of the video, I originally did not like the idea of introducing a new very important character who has a personal connection to Nate in the 4th installment of this series. But Naughty Dog did a fantastic job with his character. With his actions in this game, Naughty Dog has to toe a difficult line between making Sam both likable while he does scummy things, making him not seem like a bad guy while he does bad things. Like, when Sam is revealed to be a liar in this game, I didn't feel like fuck Sam, I was more so just disappointed. The Last of Us 2 actually could have learned a little bit from how they dealt with Sam. Granted, Abby does something much, much worse than what Sam does. And though he doesn't do much to really redeem himself, upon reflecting, which this game gives you a lot of time to do, you realize he is really the mirror image of Nate. Not so much charm or fun to him, but he has the same addiction and obsession, and you come to understand it. Also, upon thinking about it, one thing that I dismissed earlier in the summary actually does strengthen Sam's character quite a bit, and is a good reasoning for his obsession. Learning what Sam learns about his mother having really known her more than Drake, being that he was older when she died. With this knowledge, with her being on the hunt for Avery's treasure, this hunt makes Sam feel more connected to his mother when he is on it, and that takes him on a destructive path, but it is understandable. He says a few times to Nate that this treasure is ours. He feels entitled to it because of his mother searching for it, and I think that's a cool motivation. Then for our villains, Rafe and Nadine, as I said, they are my favorite villains in this series. These two feel more real, their motivations are understandable, it's not just evil for evil's sake. Rafe has a connection to the Drake brothers, which gives the conflict more depth, and in general, another big factor for this game being better to me is just how much more real and human it is. The second game is really cartoony in comparison to the fourth game. It's very clear between games that Naughty Dog grew a whole lot. Unfortunately, they Benjamin Buttoned for The Last of Us Part 2, but that's neither here nor there. So in summary, Uncharted 2 is an amazing game. Uncharted 4 is an amazing game, but I think from a combination of many factors, as you can tell by how long this video is, I think that 4 is a superior game. Uncharted 2 laid down the foundations for this series and the beats that every game hits, and 4 hits those beats while also improving upon them every step of the way. The story is miles better, while the characters are also considerably better as well. Looking at it now, especially with Uncharted 4 being out, the second game feels more and more like a relic of the past as I play it. It's still an all-time great game, still a great experience, but I have a much better time with 4. I hope this didn't make 2 seem bad in this video. It's still very good. I just think 4 is the superior game, and I feel like a crazy person watching people say 2 is better. Really, this video was more me wanting to talk about Uncharted 4 more than anything else, because I love this game, and me wanting to shit on Uncharted 1, because I hate that game. Subscribe if you enjoyed. I really like making these types of videos, so if they could be more successful, I would just love that. As for what video I'm doing next, I'm doing the worst thing anyone on the internet could ever do to themselves, giving my opinion on the Disney Star Wars movies. RIP to my comments. And I figured it would be only right that I ended this video with Richard McGonigal, aka Victor Sullivan's full cameo. I told him what I was planning on using this cameo for, as well as who I was, so here's what he had to say. So I'm gonna send you off with that, and thank you for watching my video.
Hey Jacob, Richard McGonigal here, aka Victor Sullivan, aka Sully, or as so many people like to say, Victor Goddamn Sullivan. So, I understand you're a huge fan of the Uncharted series. That shows extremely good taste. And of course, Sully is your favorite character. Just makes sense. It's a given. So, you're doing you run a gaming vid essay channel. Man, I haven't a clue what that is. I'm old school, man. I don't understand that at all. So, you're doing a vid on the Uncharted series, a video on the Uncharted 4 series, on the Uncharted 4 game in the series. There we go. So, I'm not sure exactly what it is you're doing, but I wish you the best of luck. And thanks very much for being a fan. And you want me to say, what? Bruh. I don't even know what bruh is. See, like I said, old school. So I hope you're doing well in this crazy time. Hope you're hanging in there, staying positive, keeping the light shining inside and out. Don't let the bastards get you down. And just take care of yourself, be good to yourself and your friends, and we'll all get through this together, one day at a time. Take good care. Bye for now.